What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? AJ Gore here, and I'm back with another video, and this one is a good one for somebody out there, because someone out there is wondering to tape and when not to tape. I mean, do I use tape on this reel and that funny looking spool, or what about this reel? Do I use tape on this one, or what about even this reel that ain't even got holes in it? Like, I mean, what are my options here? Should I use tape on this spinning reel? And what about this spinning reel? When is the time to use tape? And then when is not a time to use tape? Also, what tape do you use when you do use tape? We're gonna dive into that quickly, give you some tips and tricks, and hopefully it'll help you in your questions of when to tape or not to tape, because that is the question. All right, so let's dive right into this right here. The question, to tape or not to tape. That is the question. So I got a couple KastKing reels, and I got the spools out of them. I got some spinning reels, and I got some different kinds of tape to utilize in this example here. Now, this isn't just an exclusive KastKing thing. Whether you own a Lose reel, let's say maybe 13 Fishing, Daiwa, Shimano, Abu, this can all come into play in the whole gambit of different types of reels out there. So whether it's spinning or bait casting, there are going to be times where you're going to ask yourselves, when should I use tape? When do I have to use tape? And when is necessarily not a time to use tape? Now, the first thing that I'm going to get into is, say, like on a spool like this design here on the Mega Jaws Elite, you don't necessarily have to use tape, but you can. Now, let's say on this Lose reel, you don't necessarily have to use tape, but you can. Or let's go into this Spartacus reel right here. You don't necessarily have to use tape, but you can. But let's take a look at this reel right here in a spinning. You don't need to use tape at all. In fact, if you did, you'd be wasting your time because it's braid ready. That abrasive notching is what's going to help keep your braid from slipping. Now let's take a look at this reel right here. That thing, as you can see by the glare and the sheen, that is completely smooth. So if you were going to run braid on here, maybe even mono or fluorocarbon, you might see some slippage. That knot and that line will just rotate, and as you crank in that fish, it's gonna just slip and you're not gonna retrieve any line. In fact, that fish may be able to peel more line off. The whole spool can rotate on this spool. Now let's take a look at this spool. It looks like there's notches and holes in there, but it is not. It is completely smooth to a degree to where you can't run a line in and tie a knot. This spool, on the other hand, has holes, and it even has a groove and notching. So here, this is going to be a spool where you could run, if you're careful enough, run your line through it, cinch it down, tie a knot, push your knot down into that hole so it's smoother, and then put on your line. So you really don't need to run any kind of tape on this kind of a spool design. Now, this spool design right here, you may not necessarily have to need to run tape on it either. Now, you can run your line through it, tie your knot, push your knot down in there, and that's going to be an anchor point and let your line lock in as you retrieve your line. Let's move on to this type of spool design. There is no hole like we discussed. So if you tie it down and cinch it, especially when you get into the lines like the 13X finesse braid or your super power braid, both of these lines are very smooth, very silky. Now, get into your Destrin braid and a lot of other braids on the market, they're a little bit more abrasive, a little bit more rougher, so to speak. Granted, they're not talking about being silky smooth or finesse or things to that nature. So they may grip a little better, but they still stand the chance of slipping. So on a spool like this, when you're gonna run braid, this is when you're gonna want to use tape. Now, is this tape gonna work best? Or is masking tape gonna work best? I kind of like the bunching of masking tape. It's super affordable, it's inexpensive, and there's a ton of it laying around all the time. A Electrical tape is a little bit more expensive. I kind of steer away from it because it also, I live in Arizona, when this stuff gets warm, the adhesive gets gooey, like real gooey and sticky. Electrical tape is a great option to use, but to me, it leaves a film to later on down the road when you're servicing things. It's just one more task to deal with. If you remove it to freshen up your tape, you may have some gooey, greasy, ickiness on the spool. So I kind of steer away from electrical tape. But if you use it, it's what you have. It's a great option. Masking tape seems to be my go-to. It's got a great gripping rate that once you really lock it down into your spool, it will actually hold very well. Now, for me, you don't need much. I like to take a look and kind of measure how much width I need. Now you could shove this whole thing on, but it's gonna bunch over the sides. So really what you're trying to do is achieve an area of width for your knot and your spool of line to bunch down onto and really stick on. So my line is going to anchor right down in the center. That's where I'm gonna cinch it down. So as you can see, I'm going to take this tape and run it around. Now I'm overlapping a little bit. I don't want a whole bunch of tape on there to help throw off the balance of that spool and things of that nature. So I'll remove the excess. See my tag end? Just enough to adhere to each other. Put that tape down. Now you could leave it like this. Me, I prefer to really work that tape on. Let it really bind and grip. Now, when you actually take your braid and you make your loop and cinch it down really well. I like to use a uni knot sometimes. That's my most often knot I like to use. You really want to cinch it down tight on here, and it's going to grip around like these little knurled edges, those little lips. That's going to help lock that knot in there, and especially when your line loops around it, it's really going to keep that line from slipping on this spool. That's a great time to tape. You can tape this spool, but you don't necessarily need to. Let's take a look at that. All right, so let's go ahead and get it started. So I've got this sped up a little bit for the sake of the video, tying the knot. Like I said, I'm gonna go with the uni knot, and we're starting off with the Speed Demon Elite in a 10-5-1 or an 8-6-1. This is the 8-6. This is the tape spool because it's solid, no holes. So go ahead and cinch it down. Now, off camera, I am using my teeth. I know better. You guys should use a pair of pliers or some other tool and braid scissors. I'm using kitchen shears, hence why I'm needing a razor blade. So don't use my mistakes, but it's what I had in front of me at the time, and I was a little lazy. So anyways, moving forward, we're gonna go ahead and put some line on here and test the drag and then test the slippage of the tape. So now we've got the decent layer there. Let's go ahead and see how the drag is going to hold up. Getting the pull, drag is slipping, looking good. That's what we want, a little tight, but let's go ahead and lock it all the way down. And now let's see. All right, look at that. Nice, locked in. That's what we're after. Tape did its job. Gotta love that masking tape. All right, now moving on to the Mega Jaws Elite. Run it through the line guide, out the side. I have big hands. Anyways, God, I love those self-adjusting brakes. Cool design. You guys really should look into that. But here's a point right here. See, I'm struggling. If you keep struggling over and over and over, that's where tape can be used really well. Right there, hole in one. Can't do that all the time. But that's a great time to explain when to use tape and not to use tape on stuff like this. Now, I like to go ahead, when I can, run it through, lock it down, trim my tag end, and then push my knot down into the actual hollow part of the spool, down in there, lock it, and we're good. It will work. It works fine. Some people will say that's not right. You're gonna hurt your line. You could fray it and break. Hey, I'm not gonna be running it all the way down to the end. It's just there for tension normally. But I've never had a problem, so I will run it until I do. And Cliff Crochet does the same thing, but with plastic line, he didn't even tie a knot. He just runs it in there. But oh well. All right, so let's go ahead and give it the slip test. Looks good. All right, let's go ahead and lock it down and give it another pull. And all right, maybe. Okay, I believe that. Yeah, it's doing its job. Right on. All right, so now for a different spool. I don't know if you guys can see the spool laying back there. Again, I'm going with the uni knot. That spool's got a groove ran through the diameter of the spool and some holes. Now you can run it through, like I said earlier in the video, and tie a knot. It's a little bit of a task. You can do it. Or you can do what I believe is intended, loop it around, tie your knot, cinch it down, which I'm doing off screen, making sure it's good, trimming my tag end. And it may take a couple attempts, but you really want to focus and make sure that you get that knot locked into place. If you don't get it locked into place, it can slip, but you really want to get good knots, especially when you get into like your silky smooth, your finesse braids. That's really important. But, okay, so I got it tight and I've wedged that knot down in the spool, like you can see there. Now let's drop it back into the reel, line it up into the gear case, put our side plate on, lock that down, and let's put some layers on. And this drag is really loose right here, but we're going to go ahead and get a couple layers on there and start to test that drag out. All right, so here we go with some layers. Going on nice and smooth, very, very uniform, looking good, especially important on that shallow spool. Now, let's go ahead and pull some drag. Slipping like we like, okay? Let's apply a little more drag and see how she slips. All right, great. So we know the drag is doing its job, absolutely doing its job. Beautiful carbon fiber drag found on these KastKing reels. Now, let's cinch it down. Give it a pull. All right, now watch. There's that drag. It is locking up tight, doing its job so much. I'm pulling so hard. Look at that. I left owies on my finger. But the point is, this thing is ready to rock. Well, guys, I hope this video was informative enough for you. It was a little quick video on when to use tape, when not to use tape. Realistically, you can use tape in a majority of your applications, even when there is holes found on some of your spools. But there are times not to use tape. Like on this spinning reel right here, do not do it. Don't, you're wasting your time. With these 13F finesse braids and things of that nature, these silky smooths, you definitely want to have that backing or that tape, especially on something smooth like that spinning reel. So you can definitely use tape on bait casters, spin reels, things of that nature. It's found more commonly on bait casters, guys. So hopefully you can see when to use tape and when not to use tape, guys. My name is AJ Gore, and I'll see you guys in my next video with some tips, tricks, product releases, or who knows what's next coming from KastKing, guys. Thanks for watching.